After a long and grueling winter of heavy snowfall, the greater Sewickley Valley region was settling down for a hopefully more prosperous spring in the year of 1936. In fact, a warm front had come through just in time for St. Patrick's Day. With the river already running high, the sudden rainfall, and the unexpected warm weather, snow began to melt, and melt rapidly. By midday, Sewickley residents were stuck floundering for dry land, and thus came the St. Patrick's Day flood of 1936. With no electricity, no trains, no method for cars to travel, and a boil milk advisory, to say the least, the Weather Bureau was vastly unprepared for everything that happened that day. They had failed to notice that their own weather gauge was stuck. They didn't notice until far too late. Many victims were left trapped on the second floor of their homes after the first floor had quickly filled with water, while those less fortunate watched helplessly as their homes were lifted and swept down into the river valley. With the Weather Service being so underprepared, residents were left to rescue each other. One such Good Samaritan was Frederick Way, one of the most prominent figures in Sewickley history, who wrote, "The first news we had of the flood of 36 was by telephone early that March morning. The Duquesne foundry had been caught on unaware and they wanted to borrow a rowboat. Fred quickly gave them his rowboat and in turn then lent it to a family in Edgeworth, another family in Osborne, and eventually surrendered the boat to whomever needed it most. He watched from his home as houses floated by. When his boat was finally returned to him days later, the oar was broken." Florence Esther Beeler, pictured here, was just 17 at the time of the flood. She was a youth in the region and captured many photos during the flood, but more importantly, the devastating aftermath once the waters had subsided. Much like today, the Valley residents did their best to find humor in the horrors that had happened. In subsequent newspapers from the flood, columns titled "Flood Oddities" listed the strange and unexplainable. The first reported a grand piano, which had been seen floating down the Ohio River with a live rooster on top. A second reported a house that had been dislodged and carried down the river that had come to a rest with all of its clocks and photos still hanging on the walls, practically untouched. A third report described a gentleman who had been mindlessly speeding Boulevard, and while without paying a lick of attention to the road, he crashed head-on into oncoming rising water. He was completely fine, but reported to have said while water was rising to his chin, "I'd give a nickel for a boat right now." The residents of Osborne, Hayesville, Edgeworth, and the Sewickley region as a whole had millions of dollars worth of damage done to their community. The highest water level reported in all of Pittsburgh was 46 feet high. After only 4 days, it had lessened to 24 feet. Over 500 people were injured, and reports state that between 62 to 100 people died in the Pittsburgh region. Despite this hardship, the community banded together and became closer than ever before. The church donated candles to the Valley Hospital so that patients could still be seen. Men set out to rescue strangers and friends alike from cars, homes, roofs, you name it. Women of the church banded together to feed those who were displaced. Pittsburgh became better equipped for instances like this in the future, and there are now many flood markers from the 1936 flood scattered throughout. It's quite easy to say that the Sewickley Valley residents had to make their own luck on that St. Patrick's Day of 1936.